Recording in progress.
We'll give everybody a few minutes before we get started.
Good morning. Well, it's after 11. We're ready to get this meeting started. Thank you all for coming and participating in our discussion of organics and how to manage them. I'm just going to introduce the task force members, and we have a little bit of homework to do, and then I will let Aya of the Del Norte and Native Lands Native Tribes Food Council take over the meeting. I'll start myself, Craig Strong, concerned citizen and current chair of the task force.
Monica Heiner, I'm the Environmental Division Manager for the Tallawahdaini Nation.
I'm Chandra Ordway. I am the Waste Zero Specialist at Recology Del Norte.
Kira Seymour, Assistant Director, Del Norte Solid Waste Management.
I'm Marina McNeil, the Food Bank Director at the Family Resource Center.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll continue with introductions of all our participants when we get into this. At this time, if there is public comment not related to our primary topic of organic in Del Norte, feel free to step to the podium, state your name, and have your comments. Seeing none, we'll move on. Our first item 3 here is discussion and action on our minutes from our June 5, 2026 meeting. Have we all looked at those?
Move to approve.
Well, then I'd be looking for a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I believe Kira Seymour just made that motion.
Move to approve.
Okay, sorry.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now Aya has prepared a very detailed presentation for us, so I'll turn it over to her this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Craig, and thank you everybody for being here. This is our 8th, technically 10th, because we had a few extra meetings on food recovery, but this is our 10th meeting, special Del Norte Waste Management Task Force meeting that's really focused on shaping the future of food and organic waste management here in Del Norte County. The meeting focus today is going to be reviewing the draft report. And so over the course of the last year and a half, almost 2 years, we've gathered a lot of data and put together a draft report, which hopefully you guys have all had a chance to look at. I do have a few paper copies here as well if people are interested in that. But we're really going to be focusing on the findings and recommendations from that. At our last meeting in May, we reviewed a lot of the findings and a lot of the existing programs that are happening here in Del Norte. So excited to dive in today a little bit deeper into some of the recommendations. We'll also receive some updates on the equipment purchases as well as the greenhouse gas calculator today, and review what we're calling 6 recommended priorities and really identifying what needs to be kept, revised, clarified, added, or reconsidered. And we'll look at what the priorities might be long-term, going from short-term in the next few years to really what a 10-year implementation roadmap might look like. So with that, this slide we've seen many times and maybe different iterations of why we're meeting, but it really is to minimize our food waste, looking at ways to recover and redistribute edible food, how we can process organic materials responsibly, reducing our climate impact, all while looking at our long-term environmental and community benefits. And the guide for a lot of this work is through SB 1383, and this work is made possible through a local assistant grant program to really determine what is feasible and how we can shape our organic waste over the next 10 years. So we'll start by looking at the equipment purchase updates. We'll give a little brief update on the greenhouse gas calculator today, and then we're really going to dive into the recommendations and priorities found in the plan. And we're going to do that through a small group review, as well as I'll introduce the priorities, and we'll go over as a group and then break into small groups to really look at what those actions are. And we'll end the meeting by looking at a scorecard for implementation over the next 10 years. So I would like to just take a moment to pause and allow us to know who is here today. And I realize I didn't introduce myself. I know Craig introduced me. My name is Aya Mahan, and I'm with the Del Norte and Tribal Lands Community Food Council. I'm the Food System Program Director, and I have been helping facilitate these meetings over the last few years now. So I'm really glad to be here, and I guess we'll start around. We already heard from our task force, so we'll bump Ted or Drea and then to Ted. And then if you guys can please just come up to the mic and introduce yourself, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Andrea Lengto, and I'm the Executive Director of the Del Norte and Tribal Lands Community Food Council. Been helping co-facilitate these meetings with Aya, and yeah, excited to get into it today.
I'm Ted Ward. I'm Director of the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority, and the agency that I work for is essentially very much interested in listening to what the task force advises as the result of this process. So thanks. And I'll pass that behind me, but please, if you could come up to the mic, that would be helpful.
Kevin Malone, True North.
Hello, everyone. I'm Roman Worthy. I'm the Food Sovereignty Program Coordinator for Tolowadeni Nation.
Robert Ford, Tribal Resource Specialist in the Environmental Division with Tolowadeni Nation. And I was wondering if we could get that screen.
Hi, Kevin Milieu, Elk Valley Rancheria Council Member.
Hey everyone, my name is Becky Crockett. I'm the District Manager for the Del Norte Resource Conservation District. Happy to be here.
Good morning, Michael McClellan. I'm the Operations Technician with Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority. Javier Gomez, Agriculture Program Coordinator for the Community Food Council.
Hi, my name is Araya Ramos, and I also work with the Del Norte and Tribal Lands Community Food Council, and I'm the Outreach Manager.
If you are on Zoom, we would like to hear from you as well. If you could just pop off mute and introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Joel Wallen with Ambro.
Who is a task force member, by the way?
Dana Gill, True North.
This is Hula Mua with Del Norte County Environmental Health.
Good morning, Brandon Hendricks, Del Norte County Environmental Health.
Good morning, Mary Kiddo, Interested Party.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your introductions and for being here. We have looked at this evolving flow chart of our meetings, and I did want to just quickly review. We've kind of broken the work into 3 phases, which was really getting community input and then breaking down some of the different facility and program planning options, looking specifically at the education and outreach strategies in meeting 3, and then diving into what community mulching might look like in meeting 4, and composting in meeting 5. We then separated and had 2 meetings specific to food recovery in September and November of last year. And then phase 3 is really the getting into action of developing our greenhouse gas calculator, reviewing funding requests and approving them, and then really getting input on the final report as well, which is what we're doing today. This is another way to just kind of look at the process of the meetings. We're not going to spend too much time today looking at the information that we found in those meetings. We can go back to our meeting in May and watch the recording if you weren't here to get a real good overview of everything we did cover at the last few meetings in 2025. Oops, and let's see, that takes us into 2026. Our meeting in May, as I mentioned, was really going over all of our prior findings and talking a little bit about the greenhouse gas calculator and the equipment funding requests. And then in June 5th, we had a special meeting looking specifically at those equipment requests, which have been approved. And now that brings us to today to really look at the strategy of this draft report and where we can, what recommendations we can make through this process of meeting and throwing mud at the wall. I've heard multiple times in these meetings. And really the goal is to have a roadmap of where we can start and where we want to be in 10 years. So the equipment purchase update, and Ted, I will allow you to share any updates, but I have a sheet here or a chart that shows all the different organizations that were funded, the approximate cost of what was requested and what the projects were. So the FRC got funding for composters as well as equipment to make their food recovery more efficient, some scales and a pallet scale, a hand truck to be moving the very multiple pounds of food they move multiple times. Mission Possible was also approved to purchase compostable cutlery and containers, biodegradable and reusable bags and gloves. Grace Lutheran was also approved for some, again, biodegradable and reusable bags, as well as a generator so that they can operate when power goes out and to make their systems more efficient. The Community Food Council was also funded for their compost program at the Food Forest, so some equipment for that, as well as to pilot some food recovery and preservation with a freeze dryer and dehydrator. And then Open Door was also funded for their community compost system. And Taskforce was also funded to get a container so they can have a space designated for their composting program. On the far right, you can still see some of the remaining needs. Something that came up that couldn't be funded is always going to be the staffing time and the actual time it takes to do the work. And we'll look over that some more.
So I'm happy to report that we have purchased and delivered the container for the Taskforce. We are still awaiting a finalized agreement from Grace Lutheran, but we anticipate ordering the other equipment later this week. So that ball is definitely rolling. Thanks everybody for the engagement. I'm sorry for the long delays getting here, but I really appreciate the process.
And we have been meeting with the team at Blue Strike, and we had a really informative and interesting meeting with the operators and data specialists and analysts at Dry Creek Landfill. And I almost wish we would have had this meeting at the very beginning of the process to learn about where our waste is actually going once it leaves Del Norte County. And we found some really interesting things about Dry Creek Landfill. They're actually capturing 70% of the gas that is being emitted from our waste, of which 23% of that they're able to turn into energy, while the other 48% is flared. But they are transitioning into a renewable gas plant by early 2027. It sounds like they're going to be piloting and starting that operation as early as this September. So the gas is actually going to be captured and turned into a natural gas and shipped through a pipeline so that it can be utilized by the Rogue Valley. which I thought was really interesting as we're talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Understanding that's not the end all. Obviously, we want to reduce our organics that are coming out of our county, but to just kind of have some positive news that the landfill, where our waste goes, is handling it quite responsibly. We've also been able to connect with 2 other counties, Amador and Tuolumne County, to really have some baseline data for this greenhouse gas calculator tool. Through working with all 3 counties, we realized that the EPA WARM model that is really being used for baseline for our greenhouse gas calculator, it is treating wood and paper as a carbon sink and storage, which obviously doesn't necessarily align with the work and what we've been looking at over the course of the last few years of trying to really make sure that woody waste isn't going to the landfill and that it's able to be used for mulch or other resources in our community. We also saw that food waste is a shared reduction opportunity across all of the counties. And there's also a need to have some waste characterization studies to really understand what the waste streams are. I think my mind was opened a little bit in just realizing how much of our waste analysis is based off of these warm EPA assumptions versus what is actually being what is actually goes through the landfill.
If I might jump in here, the greenhouse gas calculator was originally envisioned as an additional tool to help us choose among the different technologies we might use to address SB 1383 requirements. But the timing was such, and our desire to partner with other rural communities in Amador and Tuolumne delayed that start quite a bit. And so, unfortunately, this tool, while I still believe it will be useful to us moving forward and to other communities, I really don't think its timing is such that it's been helpful in this process. So you're being updated about a tool that's still in development that isn't necessarily communicating with what we're doing now, which is a little sad, but it is part of the larger effort. And so with that, I think we can focus on the report that's before us.
Great, thank you, Ted. And then there's some naming options, but I thought that was kind of fun to think about. And you're right. Unfortunately, this tool, ideally, it would have been created and usable to help create some of the recommendations in the report. So it's really important that we get to those recommendations. And I'll just briefly skip through these 2 slides. So getting to the draft report, just a show of hands, how many people were able to open it up and take a look at it? I saw there was some anonymous people in there this morning, so I was glad to see that people were looking at it. It's really broken into 3 parts. One goes through the background and the planning process, and then the second part is the key findings and what we found through the community meeting process. And then the third part, which we'll be looking at today, really looked at what the recommended priorities are for implementation. And we narrowed it down to 6 priorities that have proposed actions, different phases of implementations, as well as highlighting the key partnerships and measures of progress. So you can scan the QR code on the screen there to open up a copy of the report, but hopefully all of you picked up this very thick worksheet of the 6 recommended priorities and findings. The goal of this worksheet is to really capture your feedback. So there are pens up front if you need a pen to be able to take notes. But the idea was that as we go over these priorities, each one of the priorities is copy and pasted primarily how it shows up in the report. And so I'll present each priority and give you guys some time to review these priorities and really give your input on, should this be revised or added? Does it need more clarity? Does it need to be more specific? Did we miss something altogether? As well as maybe what needs to come first, and or what partners or dependencies are needed as well. So with that, yeah, some questions to consider. Does the finding reflect the information collected and the community input process? Does the recommendation respond to the finding and the identified needs? Is it practical and locally appropriate? And or what language, evidence, or action should be added or revised? And then really what should be prioritized in the next few years. So with that, we'll dive into these reports. So the first one is to prevent food waste and expand edible food recovery. Our planning summary, it's really, we saw that we have a great foundation for food recovery here in Del Norte, but that expansion is constrained by a few things: infrastructure, staffing, coordination, clear compliance and reporting, which I do think that this process helped move along some of the compliance and reporting pieces, but there's still room to strengthen that. And then also looking how prevention, preservation, recovery, and emergency feeding can really function to serve community resilience. So the strategic recommendation in the report is to strengthen the existing food recovery system as the county's first organics management priority through prevention, infrastructure, staffing, clear agreements, practical data, coordinated logistics, and emergency feeding integration. If you look at your worksheet, you can see the first action area is really to expand capacity, which I think some of the funding has done, adding storage, backup power, potential vehicles, scales and weighing, staffing, as well as space. The second and third priority or action area really relate to the compliance and data collection piece of food recovery. The fourth is to coordinate the logistics, making sure that pickups are aligned, that there's distribution routes, any kind of backhaul could be strengthened, and really just strengthening the network of food recovery partners. And then 5 and 6 talk really to connecting recovery with disruptions to prevent surplus. So really, how can food recovery strengthen our daily food security, as well as during disruptions and any kind of emergency feeding as well.
Question? So I'm wondering how we're going to put input into this process, because one of the things that, as we're talking about it, that comes up for me is that we're blessed by having a variety of groups that are working on food rescue and recovery, but it actually is not entirely clear to me how we clarify the mechanisms for coordination and conflict resolution moving forward. Well, it's very helpful to have the FRC in the role of being sort of the hub of communications. There can still be conflicts between different food rescue organizations, and I'm not clear how we resolve those moving forward, although I'm eager to make sure that we have a way to do so. And similarly, we, in these discussions and explorations, we've all identified that finding sustainable funding for food recovery and redistribution staff is a shared concern, and yet it's not really on neither of these things are in the action areas. So I'm just wondering, how do we go about?
Yeah, and so I think that is exactly the kind of input that we're looking for today, of like calling out those very specific things. And on the right-hand side of the worksheet, there's comments needed, change, and first step. So I think listing those types of things in that section. The second thing that we're going to do with these worksheets is break into small groups and really look at what everybody is writing and where are their shared consensus around things, so we can dive into it and build it out even more today. Does that sound good?
Great.
Awesome.
So the plan, Ted, is as Aya presents, folks will jot down their notes on this worksheet, and then when we break into groups, you'll share what you found in your worksheet and find consensus.
Great.
So, right?
And the reason why I highlight that is because both those things I just mentioned aren't necessarily on these lists. So if you're thinking of the same kind of thing of, well, what about this? Make sure that gets down in these notes now, because now's our best chance to capture all of that.
Indeed.
And at the end, when the small groups share, then we'll voice what folks found common. But rather than each person come up and say, I found this, we'll break into small groups, find consensus, and then share out with everyone.
All right, and the next priority and recommendation is to develop community composting and or convenient collection. So something we definitely found in our work was that having a collection process may not be the best approach for Del Norte. Creating new routes creates new trucks on the road, creates more greenhouse gas emissions, which could very well be greater than the reduction to a collection service. And so really we found that it takes a distributed network, including maybe backyard approaches as well as community composting. And the biggest barrier is the operational capacity, the labor that goes into the composting. The strategic recommendation is to develop a coordinated, distributed composting network to strengthen existing systems, test convenient collection and backyard approaches, and evaluate larger scale options only after feedstock, site, staffing, regulatory, transportation, and market conditions are understood. So looking at the specific actions, connecting to the network. So and I think we have done a lot of this through this process of inventorying active and planned composting sites, convening operators, sharing technical resources, identifying opportunities for material sharing and equipment access, and peer support with coordinated outreach and education to the community. 2 and 3 really focus on building operational capacity, so educating the community, getting more people involved, providing education for backyard composting as well as for schools, potential operating trainings, and then making sure that people have things like bins and carts, screening equipment. 4 really looks at piloting different approaches and measuring the results to see what works best for our community. And then 5 and 6 really look at planning for future capacity and what is viable for our community. The next priority is probably the one that needs the most development, and that is to develop appropriate processing and beneficial uses. And it really focuses on our woody materials, looking at a potential for municipal mulching. And I guess there's 2 pieces. There is what would it look like for our municipality to operate mulching maybe at the transfer station, and or partnerships. We've talked about different agricultural partnerships as well as the value of our tribal partners and different community partners as well to help utilize the mulch and or lead some of them. We also discussed how the Fire Safe Council has used mulching to help with fire resilience in communities. And I believe in your worksheet for that, it goes through priority 3A, which really focuses on developing a municipal mulch production and distribution using the existing records that we have to look at what systems we might use for different materials like grass, brush, stumps, wood, or related areas, and summarizing the approximate quantities of those, which some of this data already exists through the Waste Management Authority, but really getting clear on what different products could be produced and then securing the end users. And I think this is the biggest piece, is making sure that those partnerships are in place before we invest in municipal mulching, so that the mulch is actually being used and not being stockpiled and building up. And we talked a lot about different innovative partnerships, having the city be using the mulch in all of their landscaping, and or the county using mulch, road Caltrans using mulch for the roads for weed suppression. So really identifying what are those partnerships and building those partnerships before a municipal facility is put into place. Priority 3B, and these ones are really long. I apologize. Again, this is a draft, so we're hashing it out together, and I appreciate your guys' input. Priority 3B is really looking at evaluating organic processing and agricultural partnerships. So we heard from Alexander Dairy how they're able to utilize their waste product and create an even higher value product. So what other opportunities are there to connect with our agricultural businesses and conduct, maybe it's a pilot to get started to see, does this actually work? And or also, again, confirming those markets before expansion. And I know there's a lot there, so I'll just kind of give you guys a pause.
Y'all, just to remind everybody, y'all are clear why there's a separation between agricultural woody material and municipal woody material. The idea is that as a municipal service, we receive materials from the general public all the time, all the spectrums of the individuals and the qualities and contaminations thereof. So agricultural to agricultural processing has much fewer hoops than municipal processing. Municipal processing, generally you have to plan on having the things in the stream that you don't want there. And agricultural processing, you're generally trusting, you're talking farmer to farmer, and you know what material you're getting. And so there's fewer permitting restrictions.
Thank you for that clarification, Ted. I think it's also important to recognize that with the municipal versus the agricultural waste isn't often found in our waste stream. And so if we're really looking at reduction of greenhouse gases, even if they're doing amazing work, that isn't going to be captured in our numbers that are recorded through the Waste Management Authority as well. And then the fourth one, I think it came up a lot in the beginning of the process and then just kind of continued throughout, but really looking at building education, technical assistance, and a workforce, and not having it be just for one project, but really for all of the different priorities. Not a standalone campaign. So residents, businesses, institutions, operators, school and partner needs, audience-specific guidance, hands-on learning, technical assistance, and workforce pathways tied directly to the priority programs. So really this priority is around developing a coordinated education, technical assistance, and workforce framework tied directly to priority programs with shared messages, audience-specific support, hands-on demonstration, and training pathways for the people who will operate and sustain the systems. And I think we saw some of this when we were talking about community composting and some of the workshops that have been happening, but really a need for shared language across the county so we can all be on the same page and understanding how we can include composting, whether it's in our offices, in our schools, in our homes, and having that shared communication. And then it looks like action areas 2 through 3 support audience specific support. So maybe we have education campaigns specifically for all the schools. And maybe there's one specific for ag. And then also assisting businesses in developing tools as well, and education. And then priority or actions 4 and 5 really lie in training operators and demonstrating different solutions. While action area 6 works to build a workforce, connecting training to paid work and viable enterprises. And we were able to see some amazing entrepreneurship using waste streams through some of our community planning process. So really opening our youth up to that and our community up to some of the training opportunities available. And then priority 5 focuses on strengthening partnerships and our local economic capacity. So clarifying roles, honoring tribal sovereignty, sharing assets, and building markets around demonstrated demand. So really looking at our planning, we saw that no single organization can implement the strategy alone. It really takes all of us coming together, which is why I appreciate all of you for coming and showing up today. But really having clear roles for each of our individual roles, sharing assets, having sustainable funding, and having markets grounded in a verified demand. So we did identify what the end uses of a lot of these organics could be, and so making sure that there's a demand and a market opportunity in place. So this strategic recommendation for priority 5 is to use a partnership-based implementation structure that respects tribal food sovereignty, clarifies roles, shares assets where practical, and develops local enterprise only where demonstrated demand and doable operating capacity support it. You can look at the actions specific to priority 5, and the first is really clarifying governance and the waste management's role in coordinating or identifying program leads, supporting partners, the reporting responsibilities, and resource needs for each priority action. 2 focuses on tribal engagement and how we can work together with our tribal nations. 3 and 4 look at shared assets and how we can develop market demand. And 6 looks at how we can align funding. All right, and our last priority is building a sustainable and accountable management system. And this really leans into that greenhouse gas calculator tool, but having a baseline and scorecard to really have a way to measure the input of these programs and to confirm practical data roles and methods with partners so we can really look at these different strategies, maybe some of the pilots that we've done, and see if they would be a viable option that we could adapt through 2040. So I'd like to just take a quick pause and see if anybody has any questions or clarifications before we break into small group sessions to really dive a little bit deeper in small groups into these actions.
One small thing. For each of these recommended priorities, I really think it's important that everybody put their input as to who's driving that particular priority, who's responsible for it. Because while the authority can do some of this, I don't think the authority can do all of it. And of course, if we have goals, it's really important to know who we're looking to achieve those goals.
Agreed. I think that's really important.
Not to put you on the spot, Ted, but just looking at the priorities, is there, 1 or 2, or where do you see the authority kind of taking the lead? And
Right.
where
For
do you-
example, on preventing food waste, while the authority has a driving role in terms of trying to support that, the FRC is a pivotal role in terms of trying to coordinate that outreach. Similarly, when we're looking at developing community compost and outreach, then we need probably a location, such as maybe Open Door or some other community garden where those partnerships can be, where we can do those kinds of training. When we're looking at, of course, developing organics processing, the authority should be in the driver for the mulch because we're the source of a lot of it. Organics processing and agricultural partnerships, I would probably be looking towards Alexander Dairy or some other agricultural body to coordinate those conversations. And then building outreach and education, that's the authority, and then the calculator is the authority. And strengthening partnerships in local economic capacity, that could be the authority, but if we had an economic development council, that would be probably the group that we would look to, because while the authority is, we're all about trash and recycling and discards, we're not the source of all economic development in the county and shouldn't be looked to as such. Thank you.
Any other clarifications or questions? I know it was a lot of information to take in all at once. All right. I think that the best next step then is to break into small groups and kind of have some more informal discussions amongst ourselves. So the first thing we'll do is compare your reviews and just chat a little bit about what maybe you flagged that needs to be revised, clarified, or reconsidered. Or as Ted mentioned, who is going to be responsible for these things? Do the actions feel like the right actions? Are there things you would like to add? And then the next part will be to select 3 of those and really break it down with your group into a deeper dive discussion where you evaluate the recommendation, what the value and importance of it is, how feasible it might be, if it's locally workable, who needs to be involved, when it should happen, and then what's missing. And then we will review maybe the strategy as a whole briefly if there's time, or a little bit over time. So we'll see how long we have for that. And then we'll share amongst ourselves at the end. We'll prepare to report out. So I do have another worksheet that just one person can take notes on. So within your group, decide who will be the one to share back. So the goal is to utilize the handout that you just had, and then there is a very short group activity worksheet here that really just will help you guys take notes and have something to present back.
And my request would be that the task force members spread themselves out amongst different groups to the extent possible, and I'll hop between groups.
So we have about 20 minutes. Yep. So around 12:10. You're fine. I know it was a late.
Is anyone on Zoom? I'm sending you messages in the chat, so please respond there.
So remember to just start with what you found on your worksheet.
Recording stopped.
All right, we have one more minute until we need to come back together. All right, we do want to bring it back together, everybody. We've got just a few minutes. I want to make sure we build in plenty of time to hear input. All right, we're going to go ahead and come back together as one group. I can tell there's some really good conversations going
Recording
on.
in progress.
All right, thank you, everybody. It sounds like there was some really good conversations happening. And now I would love to hear back from each group. On maybe, am I getting a lot of echo?
Yeah, but we don't know why.
All right, test. Okay. All right, so did every group assign somebody to report back? Because I would love to hear back what your highest priority action was And I know that probably the conversations kind of changed from maybe what is on this slide of, what was unresolved, what feels ready. So with that, I'd just like to turn it over to a lead from each group to kind of share what your findings were in this process.
I can share from our group. Our conversation did definitely spin in many different directions. We started just looking at priority 1 and got stuck there for quite some time. But then we decided, considering who we had on our group, that we would talk about preventing food waste and education, building education, technical assistance, and partnership, strengthening partnerships. One of the things that we were talking about, we all got kind of stuck in on who's responsible for what. So we went down the list and talked about how the authority can't be responsible. In fact, nobody else except for the individual agencies can be responsible for preventing surplus and for right-sizing things. The only thing we could offer is maybe assistance in waste auditing, etc. We talked a lot about the difficulty with having a sustainable system when all of the food rescue is dependent on grant funding and volunteers. And so I wanted to add the possibility of looking into expanding MOU with the county, etc. Institutionalizing these systems a little bit further to allow for salaries and sustainability. We did spin out quite a bit. Can I have the notes, by the way? Okay. Okay, you want to take over a little bit?
I can.
Okay.
I'll keep it brief.
Or you can give them to me and I'll.
We talked about, I think, for priority 4, number 3, assisting businesses and how the businesses could be assisted, what the best approach would be, whether it's cold calling them, having a social media campaign. We recognized in a small community, it's really important to go to them and build that relationship, but also featuring a social media campaign because that is our community's popular way of getting information. We discussed having potential flyers that could be given out, and something that I thought was really interesting was for our larger generators having a poster that could be put on the wall of how to manage organics in their business, and this could be something that was passed out via the Waste Management Authority. It could potentially be by environmental health because they are already going in and inspecting those businesses and have a relationship. And I think those are most of my notes. Anyone else from the group? Did I miss anything, Julie? You're gonna have to come up front though.
Those were the pieces that I was missing. Thank you, Aya.
One of the things that we had talked about too is, from my perspective, reaching out to the larger generators with a larger generator, right? Like if somebody who manages a small restaurant comes and wants to talk to me at Nutrition Services about managing waste, we're not talking apples to apples at that point. So I think things like, me talking to the hospital about how they manage waste is going to make more sense just because we're operating at the same volume and would have similar struggles in terms of what we're looking at. it's much easier on a smaller scale to do composting. Once you get into large volume, like the hospital, the casino, the school district, things like that, there are different considerations and different management pieces that come into play. So I think having someone familiar with that level going to those producers is going to make more sense because they're going to speak a similar language. So that was the kind of the, I think, important part of that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, I know there was 2 other groups.
I can go for our group. We talked more at length about several different things. We didn't get all the way down the 6 priorities. I think that a lot of our focus was the need for funding to support staff, time, and also having an independent person that is coordinating all the different entities, different, county, tribal, waste management, so that it's someone who's independent from all of us, but that can work together to coordinate us. And then also we talked about the mulching, and since it's such a important first step in creating compost, that Ted was suggesting that the authority should contract out to do a mulch feasibility study.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I could go next for our group. We didn't get through the list at all, but stopped at number 3 and spent all our time on that, dealing with mulch and organic waste. Yeah, with a lot of helpful input from Becky at Resource Conservation District and Elk Valley. Came up with, well, citing of such a location. Certainly the transfer station is such a location that receives a known amount of mulch. So that's a candidate, but there is not the space there to process it. So we, bounced around several ideas of what locations could be used. It emphasized that keeping it out of the coastal zone, wherever that ends up being, is going to be really important to avoid permitting or even have permission at all to conduct such an operation. And then there's also discussion about just woody debris, straight mulch, like from the Fire Safe Council, or what is hauled in by self-haulers for brush at the transfer station. There is that side of it, but if you want to make good compost that is saleable, you need a lot of more organic waste and more of the green waste than the woody debris. So a blended mulch composting operation is preferable to just straight woody debris, which has its application like on the stream side, roadside mulching and that sort of thing. But if you want to create compost and have an income from it, you need to incorporate food waste and other green waste into the system. Discussed that while there is grant money available for equipment, again, we have the problem of sustainability, that there's not usually money to maintain staffing or have someone dedicated to running such an operation that is a compost manufacturing facility, basically. Several locations were discussed. Reservation Ranch also has an agricultural composting facility in Smith River, in addition to the Alexander project. And there is a potential for a facility at Elk Valley, but the Valley Council is still needs to make some decisions as to what's going to happen to that land. There is money from CAL FIRE grants for economic development doing exactly this sort of thing. So that's a promising avenue. What else am I missing? I think that's as far as we got. Okay.
Thank you, Craig. Was that every group, or was there still another group here? I know there was an online group. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, just really briefly, because we are running out of time, I had the opportunity to chat with Hua online, and we were looking at both the food recovery and compost, and just our two kind of recommended steps were making sure that the food recovery stakeholders are meeting and talking because there is things changing so much. So working with the FRC to help them to lead quarterly meetings, like a food recovery task force, just so they're all on the same page. And then environmental health for the county does do permitting for large scale and agricultural composting. And so they know what the regulations are for those facilities. And we talked about developing sort of a best practices for small or pilot composting, community composting systems based on the current permitting. So looking at what you would have to do for the large scale and developing systems for the small scale so that they know that they're going in that direction. And that's it.
Awesome. I'm super grateful for all of the feedback. And if you guys can leave any of your notes or worksheets, if you feel comfortable leaving your individual worksheet where you have your notes, that would be fantastic. If you would like it back, I can scan it and give it back to you via email. Just let me know so I make sure I can get that back to you. And I realize we are just 2 minutes till the end of our meeting, so I don't think that we will have time to look at the broader roadmap of moving these things forward, but I think that's okay for today. I think getting some really valuable feedback will help strengthen this report. I would like to suggest or bring up the next meeting and kind of go back. If I can get the presentation pulled up, that would be fantastic. Just to close out our meeting briefly. So I'd hope to go over some of these like measures of success of how we can really make sure that our report is accurate, but I would like to potentially set the next task force meeting date if needed, or it could be something we follow up. And in terms of reviewing the timeline, the final report will be turned in September 15th. So we have about a little less than a month to put the final touches on this. The report draft right now is open for comment. So if you have things that you would like to add that you weren't able to add to comment or share today, please go into that report and add comments. We will be utilizing those comments to build out the final draft as well. And it's really a valuable piece of the planning process to make sure we're hearing from you all so it reflects our community's needs.
I have one thing to add is I didn't even begin to fill out this, and I would like to. I imagine others in the room also. And since you've already spent the paper to print them, can we take these home and complete them and deliver them to your office?
That would be fantastic. I'll also invite you to come down to the Wednesday Farmers Market and drop them off there if that's convenient and you're shopping, or please feel free to bring them to our office as well.
And your office is located at?
It is located at 510 East Washington Boulevard off of North Crest in Crescent City.
You can also hand them in at the Harvest Festival on Saturday, August 29th at the Food Forest from 12 to 4.
Okay, well, thank you for all that. Are we in a place where we want to look for a next meeting date?
September 7th or 8th, perhaps?
The 7th is Labor Day.
Oh, good point. 8.
Any objections to the 8th
The 8th?
For me,
Okay. You want to suggest a time, sir?
I'm flexible. Anyone has constraints on their time, would like a morning, afternoon?
I would say afternoon would work better for the food council.
Okay, that is likely. Well, I don't know exactly when the Board of Supervisors are, but they are on Tuesday. That's the consideration. That is a board meeting date. So,
And you guys will just be coming back from CRA.
right, but it'll be so late afternoon would be probably the time that would work. 3 o'clock, tentatively.
One unavailability.
There's
Yeah, I have a doctor's appointment, so I won't be available, but Aya could be.
Yeah, I can make that work. 3 o'clock on September 8th, Tuesday, September 8th at 3 p.m. I'll go ahead and send out an invite to that.
If there's any changes, we'll let you.
Great.
You want to confirm the room availability, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay, so we have our tentative next meeting, September 8th at 3 p.m., probably in the board chambers, but that will be.
We will confirm that we can reserve the room and tech support.
Thank you all so much for participating and for joining us here. I hope that some really good things come out of this. And with that, I believe we are adjourned.